So, all right. So real quick, we're going to talk about listing contracts. So if someone comes up to you and says, hey, I'd like you to list my house, here's what we do. So obviously we would get into transaction desk and start a new transaction. In order to do that, you just hit that little house on the left side and you add. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I've done that and I've created a place that I'm going to list. Okay, so one of the great things about doing this is that the powers that be have these wonderful checklists. So if you're not sure which forms you need, there's a checklist attached to the listing forms in transaction desk. So I will go down here and go, we're just going to list a house that I had listed a little bit ago. It just closed. So obviously here's the transaction checklist. Here are all the rest of the forms you need on any given house. Some of them will not apply to various houses, and I'll show you how that works. So residential input form, that's for everyone. Okay, so that's the form that tells you inputs, how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, what kind of driveway, etc. Everything always needs agency. Obviously, a listing contract is required. Addendum to selling contract is not always required. Addendum to listing contract, not always required. Lead-based paint, only if it was built before 1978. Seller's property disclosures, obviously, yes, you need that. Let me scroll down here. Disclosure alternatives, it'll be one or the two, right? It's either the seller's property disclosures or the disclosure alternatives. Amendment to disclosure statement. So when would you use an amendment to a disclosure statement? If, let's say you list a house and then 2 weeks in, the wind comes and rips part of the roof off. Okay, well, obviously we gotta disclose that. So that is just when something changes and you have to let your buyers know that something has changed. That's where you would put it down, get everyone to sign it. Subsurface sewage treatment system. Obviously, if you're in town, that's not going to be applicable. If you're in the country or on a farm, it will. Same with the well. And if you do the well, you're going to need that location map. If you're doing a townhome, you're going to need the CIC resale disclosure. Broker to broker commission agreement, only required when paying on the net. Sometimes people will say, I am not going to pay commission on if my buyer has asked for closing costs, for instance. So that's where that would come in. There are some builders who only will pay on the net as well if closing costs have been rolled into the deal. Fraud, wire fraud, always part of every transaction. And then there are these specific Keller-Williams disclosures that we have to add. So I'll show you what I pulled in. I'm going to save and exit that. I'm going to show you the forms that I have pulled in. Let me scroll down here. So we have the listing contract, I'm pulling that around. The residential listing input form, property disclosures. So these first three are the ones that are part of the listing. The bottom two are the kind of the Keller-Williams ones, the agency and the disclosure. So let's look at each of those real quick. So listing contract. Obviously, that's where we're going to start. Miguel, have you ever done a listing before?
I have one listing right now.
Okay, so we're going to review this, and so it'll be good. So you've obviously seen this before. So let's start at the top. When I talk to my sellers or buyers, I always refer to the line items on the left side to make sure we're all in the same spot. So line one, obviously the date, how many pages are part of this contract. This lines 4 through 6 is the legal description and the address. Line 7, we put the seller's name. Obviously the broker, this is important. Line 9, the contract starts on July 27th, that would be today, and ends on, every contract needs a start and an end date. So the question always is, how long do you let this contract go for, right? So my opinion, and this is just because it's easier for my brain, I always say every contract for me is going to end July 31st or December 31st. So that I'm not wondering, oh, did this end on like November 15th or some random date, it helps me know, okay, December, check all your contracts, see if there's any that need to be renewed. So I usually push this out to December 31st, okay? So we obviously have discussed a price, so that's a different class, how to come up with a price. And what are the terms of this agreement? What kind of an offer will you accept? Cash, conventional, VA, and FHA, right? So you may be listing a home that's kind of in rough shape, and you may go, I don't think this is going to qualify for an FHA or a VA loan. So then you probably will want to state that in the agent remarks, probably will not qualify for FHA or VA. Basically, that means there's a lot of peeling paint, maybe screens are broken, there's a lot of cement work that's, you know, so those are some of the things they're looking for. But for the home that we're listing, this is a place in Byron, it will absolutely pass all of those. Okay, so then the next decision that has to get made has to do with, how does this appear on the MLS? Sorry about that, I'm just jumping all over the place here. I left my mouse at home. Oh. Miguel, I'm struggling. Okay, how do we want to list this on the internet? There's 4 options you and your seller have to discuss. Option 1, line 40. Do you want this listed on the internet? Well, yes, that's how we sell things, right? Unless you're the FBI and don't want anyone to know you're selling it, that's what we're going to do. Option 2, do we want the address listed on the MLS? Well, again, unless you've got some reason to be super secretive, that would be a yes as well. Option 3 and 4. Ooh. Hello. Welcome, welcome. We're just jumping in on the listing contract real quick. We're on line 56 if you want to join us. So like option 3 and 4 have to do with when you put a listing on the MLS and it blasts out to everybody who owns some kind of a site that's going to have these listings. Some of the sites have options on them. So for instance, Zillow always has the Zestimate. That's an option. So option 3 says, do we want your property to be auto-valuated? So I typically will say no, because what if Zillow's algorithm does not apply well for your listing? And honestly, it may be too low, it may be too high. So you try and convince a buyer that your asking price is up here when Zillow has said it's down here, but they don't understand what are all the issues that are going into that valuation. I think I just say it messes up buyers and sellers. So I tend to say no on the auto valuation. Option 4 is, as it blasts out to these sites, there are some sites that allow viewers to leave comments. That's a great looking bathroom. I love the tile. Oh, that's a terrible look. Who wants some grouchy person to be leaving nasty comments? So I typically say no to that one. Okay, so and that's how I approach it when I talk to buyers and sellers, or when I talk to sellers. So the next thing we have to decide is the property for lease? It is not for lease, and it may not be for lease. Okay, so we're going to scroll down. Seller's obligation. This is important as well. So basically, we need to inform the sellers. They agree to provide and pay for any inspections and reports required by a governmental authority. Okay, so that almost never comes up. They should cooperate with the broker in selling the property, provide unit owners association docs if required. Sellers shall remain responsible for security, maintenance, utilities, and insurance during the term of this contract, and for keepsaking security and securing and or concealing any valuable personal property. So I always tell my sellers, if you've got medication, firearms, anything that someone's going to come through and be like, ooh, they've got Vicodin in their medicine cabinet. I can't control who opens the medicine cabinet. I can't control, you know, what they see. So take any of those personal items, put them in a container, have someone else keep them, or just put them in the car and take them with you when you are leaving, when someone's looking at your house. Okay, sellers shall surrender any abstract of title and copy of any title owner's insurance policy for the property if it's in the seller's possession or control. Seller shall take all action necessary to convey marketable title by the date of closing as agreed to in the purchase agreement. Seller shall sign all documents necessary to transfer to buyer marketable title to the property. So those are the seller's obligations, access to the property, obviously. This is an important one. Authorize other brokers and their salespeople, inspectors, appraisers, contractors, and other industry professionals to access the property at reasonable times and upon reasonable notice. Okay, so if the buyer is getting an inspection for the furnace and the furnace guy comes, you've got to allow them to have their inspections, okay? Allow them to access the property. Okay. Recording on the property. Seller understands that based on this statute, it specifically prohibits the interception of oral communication without the consent of at least one of the two parties to the communication. Seller should seek appropriate legal advice. So if there's a recording device on the property, I'll put that in the agent remarks. Okay, so that's important as well.
Like as small as a baby monitor. You know, some people
Yeah.
use the technology have that.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, that recording device is active. So okay, so now we're going to talk about compensation, line 115 and on. So seller agrees to pay a retainer fee of, okay, this is how I do it. I don't charge a retainer fee, but I do charge 3% of the selling price or $0, whichever is greater. So the 3% is typically greater. Okay. So you have a decision to make here. When I list a house, I pre-inspect, you get the pictures, you got to pay for a sign. So there's at least 3 things that I'm paying for. Sometimes I will say, I'm gonna keep 3, oh, hang on a sec. Let me back this up. This is 6%. I'm going to tell you later how I break that down. Sometimes people say, well, what if you bring the buyer? You might add a clause that says, should, here, I can never type when people are watching me. Secure a buyer for this property.
Then you get like 4.5 or something.
Then listing commission shall be 5%. You're very generous. Okay, so sometimes you can say, well, if that allows me to get the listing, then I will put that in there if there's any pushback. Okay. And that's a decision you make, whatever that price is that you want to be. Okay. This section here says you've got 6 months after the expiration of this contract, the seller should, if within 180 days after the expiration of this contract, seller sells or agrees to sell the property to anyone who has during this contract made an inquiry of the seller about the property, or during this contract made an affirmative showing. So anybody who's inquired or had a showing on this property after this contract has expired, you can still get paid if they write an offer and it goes to closing, only if within 72 hours after the expiration of this contract, then the seller let me go back. How do they word this? Affirmative showing of interest in the property by responding to an advertisement or by contacting the broker or the licensee involved, or was physically shown the property by the broker whose name and address is on a written listing broker, and gives to seller within 72 hours after the expiration of this contract. Then the seller shall still pay the broker the compensation noted here, even if the seller sells the property without the broker's assistance. So basically, if somebody has gone and looked at that property and the contract expires and you give that seller written notice saying these are all the people who have looked at this property or have inquired about it, if one of those people comes back and ends up buying the place, you can still get paid. I can explain it way better than I can read it, evidently. All right, compensation disclosure. Broker shall offer compensation to cooperating brokers. Now, this is where you decide how much are you paying out. So this line 149, it talks about brokers representing buyers. Line 151 is brokers assisting buyers. So that's a facilitator. So again, this is where I will typically go 3.3 or 0. And so if you're assisting, then I will typically pay out 1%. There's no representation. There's somebody just filling out forms for you, okay? So hang on a sec. I'm so mixed up today. 2.7 is what I'm paying out because I'm keeping 3.3. Okay. The next thing we have to make a decision about is line 163. Seller directs broker to arrange for a qualified closing agent, or a seller will do it themselves. I very strongly encourage my people to, if they don't, unless you're a closer or a lawyer, how do you know what to do? So I will close anywhere, and I'll tell people, if you want to close at Ole Law, we'll close at Ole Law. If you want to close at a specific title company, we can do that as well. But this is just a choice they have to make, and then they have to initial that as well. Important question about, are they a foreign person? It's not an immigration question, it's a tax question. There's specific tax withholdings if they are not, if they are a foreign person. So you can read up on that. Obviously, agency is going to be discussed prior to signing this. So your seller is going to have to agree or not agree to dual agency. If they agree to dual agency, anyone can come look at their place. If they do not agree to dual agency, then nobody who works for Keller Williams Premier Realty can come and take a look at the place. Okay, everyone needs to sign that. So there's various terms that you can take a look at as well. I'm not going to read through each of those individually. So basically, if they're okay with all those terms, then we sign the listing contract. Okay. Important here, why do I have to say marital status when the seller is signing? Why is that important?
Because it's a marriage and you need both signatures.
Yeah, it's a title question, right? So FERPTA is a tax question. Are they married or not is a title question. It takes 1 to buy, 2 to sell in Minnesota. Okay, perfect. So obviously that's the listing contract. The listing input form, if you have never done this, I'm certainly not going to go through every line. There's about 10 pages of this once it loads. There we go. So this is where everything you can think of about the property gets entered in, okay? Anywhere where there's a square box like this has to be entered. When there is a square box that's not in black, does not have to be entered, okay? So that needs to be filled out completely. Obviously, the property disclosures need to be filled out completely. I'm gonna load this up. Sometimes if you have a property that has some complicated disclosures, like I listed a place one time that they had a fire in the house. Well, there's no place on this to kind of explain fully all the things they had to do to that house, right? So we had a supplemental page that went with the disclosures. So if that's the case, if there's something that that seller has to explain and there's not room enough on this form, have them put it on a separate form and then make sure that the buyer signs that form, that they have seen it, okay? So obviously you're gonna fill this out. You tell your seller, to the best of your knowledge, fill out all of the issues, all of the things here. And I always say, sometimes go walk around your house, because if you've lived in your house for 10 years, you might have forgotten that that ceiling fan doesn't work because you've just like gotten so used to not using it. Or, oh yeah, the timer on my oven doesn't work anymore. So go around and try and refresh your memory, okay? And I say disclose, disclose, disclose. If there's a question of, hey, should I disclose that my daughter spilled red paint on the carpet in her bedroom when she was 2? Yes, because there's a spot on here that talks about floor covering, right? Is there any damage to floor covering? Disclose, 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 okay? All right, so that's your seller's disclosure. Again, I'm not going line by line on that one. It's pretty self-explanatory. You're gonna obviously fill out the agency and then these seller disclosures, waivers, and notices. Let's take a look at those really quick. Okay, so the first one talks about, I'm a licensed real estate agent. I'm not an expert in surveying, inspections, construction, title, law. Okay, so you can't give tax or legal advice or talk about things that are not in your lane. Like if you're showing a house and someone says, do you think I could tear down that wall? Is it structurally, will that structurally compromise my house? Like, I have done a lot of remodeling, but I'm not gonna say, oh, that should be fine. That's not my lane, right? That's part of, we could get a licensed contractor to come out and evaluate that if that's something that is important to you. So make sure you stay in your lane. And if you don't know the answer, don't fake it, right? Get the real answer. Authorized open houses. Are you okay if I hold an open house? Yeah, of course I want you to hold an open house. Okay, so then we sign and say, take your valuables away when they hold the open house, and I'm not responsible for if there's theft or people going through your cabinets. Okay, so they need to understand that, and most people understand that. Affiliated business arrangement disclosure. Keller Williams owns a title company and a mortgage company. You're not required to use either of those, but I do have to tell you that we own both of those. Commission, I have to tell you that there's a $5.99 broker admin commission that gets paid to the office. I don't get that. It keeps the lights on and pays our staff at the office, okay? So that's outside of the listing commission. So that needs to be disclosed. Seller's multiple offer acknowledgement. So if we get multiple offers, Miguel, are you okay that I share that with other agents? And sometimes people are like, well, like, tell me about that. Well, if I have multiple offers, somebody writes an offer and I'm getting another one in, if I tell them we have another offer on the table, they're going to reconsider their offer, and basically you're asking for highest and best,
Yep.
right? So there's not an offer that gets written and the buyer's like, well, you're just going to counter, right? Like they want to do that dance. No, we have multiple offers, so it helps them bring their best offer to the table. So it's in your best interest for me to tell those other agents, but I need your permission to do that. Use of internet images. Once we take pictures of your home, Miguel, and they blast out onto the world of the internet, I cannot control if somebody takes your bathroom picture and puts it on their Pinterest wall because they like the tile you chose, right? Once your pictures are out there, they're out there. And lastly, seller advertising. So once we list your house, it goes on the MLS, and the Department of Commerce says there are certain ways that I have to comply with advertising. And so that transfers over to you. So you can't list your house. You can't go, hey, my house is on Craigslist. Hey, my house is for sale. Come call Carrie Brand to have a showing. No, I will put it on the MLS. You can take that listing and copy it anywhere you want, but I need to make sure my broker's name is on there and that I'm licensed in Minnesota. Okay, so those are some of the things that I have to make sure are in compliance. So you can advertise all you want, but you have to take my MLS listing and then blast that. So you can't go off and do your own advertising for the house. Make sense?
Like the things that would fall in line with that, let's say you have like your own Facebook page, you post in the listing, coming soon.
Yeah.
That the exact same person that you listed that house for also has a Facebook and they share it.
That's absolutely.
Okay because it's the original content.
Absolutely. It has all the things the Department of Commerce says it needs to have for compliance. I will often, if we're Facebook friends, and I always try and get to be Facebook friends with anyone who I'm doing business with, I will just tag them on that listing, and then it automatically goes to all their friends as well. But I just say share all you want. You can share that all you want on social media, but don't go off on Facebook Marketplace and just say, hey, our house is for sale. It's listed at $439. Call Carrie if you're like, there's no broker name on there. There's nothing. So they cannot do that. Sometimes if you have male employees,
like the mail classifieds.
yeah, you can say share it all you want on the mail classifieds, but you have to use the MLS that I provide you, that listing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you guys, those are all the documents that you need to list a house. Any questions about that? Okay. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. And if there's anyone here who can help any time of the day. So, okay, you guys, that is it. Talk to you later.